Hello and welcome to the Washington AHEC Scholars Podcast. My name is Jordan. I am the Senior Coordinator for the Southwest Washington Area Health Education Center. Today I am joined by Dr. Kyle Turner, who is a pharmacist out of Utah, who is joining us today to talk about leadership. Hello, Dr. Turner. Welcome to the Washington AHEC Scholars Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Do you mind if I call you Kyle for the duration of this
That
podcast?
is fantastic.
Just a little bit of background is Kyle has done quite a bit of work with us here at Southwest Washington for relational leadership training. And so when we were thinking about redoing the curriculum for the AHEC Scholars this year, you were one of the first ones that came to mind of somebody who could do a topic or two for us. So thank you so much for making the time today.
Yeah, very excited to be here.
Well, just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So I am in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm on faculty at the University of Utah, where I teach courses in leadership and management. I also, my background, clinical background as a pharmacist is actually in primary care. So I spent about a decade in a primary care clinic, not really dispensing drugs, right, but helping manage different conditions and working with an interprofessional team. So physicians, nurses, social workers, medical assistants, the whole gamut of professionals. So my clinical background is that, and what I love to do is help healthcare teams function better.
Okay, well, that's really fascinating. It's funny you mentioned that about your clinical background. Even just last week, we did a camp with some students, and one of the students is like, "Oh, so pharmacists, that's all they do is push pills at the Walgreens, right?" And I just have to laugh because you and I have talked about that before about how it's so much more involved. So
Yeah.
that would be another episode to really break down exactly what it is that a clinical pharmacist does. But what we're here today to talk about is that last part you mentioned about leadership and relations between healthcare staff. Um, can you kind of talk about that a little bit more? How would you define leadership?
Yeah, you bet. So, one of the definitions that I like is from a professor at Harvard named Marshall Gantz. You can look up all kinds of definitions of leadership. So, this isn't the only one, but this is one that I like, which is enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. So, you take on that responsibility. It's always about enabling other people. It's about a shared goal, a shared idea that we're working on. But the piece that I think is really interesting is this idea of uncertainty, right? Leaders are needed when we don't know what to do, when we need to chart a new path forward or fix something or improve something. So I just love the different aspects of that definition.
Yeah, and in a healthcare setting, I'm sure that uncertainty is kind of that's your day-to-day partner is not knowing exactly what has to happen. So when you think of leadership, we got this kind of good definition to frame it. But what do you think about? What comes to mind when you think about leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, as a leader, we always we always start with us as individuals.
Mhm.
Right? Why do I feel like I'm a leader? Why do I feel called to be a leader? I feel like most people have a little bit of this inkling, right? Maybe it's I see something wrong and I want to fix it. Maybe it's I see a group of people that need help and I want to jump in, right? There's this little bit of yearning. But from that, do we spend time thinking about us, right? What are my strengths? How do I show up with other people? What am I good at? What am I not good at? What are the, places that I lead from, the different attributes that I have that I lead from, and what are some other ones that I need to think about? What are my core values? What do I think is really important? All of that stuff is sort of in this domain of self-awareness. And I think to be effective as a leader, you have to always start with who you are, gain some awareness. Um, After we start to do that, you get into self-correction. So part of it's knowing, well, I know that I can really be helpful here. I'm going to be really thoughtful about what I say yes to or where I jump in. That sort of self-correcting. And then ultimately, I think the work of a lifetime is self-mastery. Do I start to understand myself so well that I know where I can be of service and where I can lead others?
Okay, wow. So that's another kind of through topic that keeps coming through these discussions is like this all starts with yourself. It's not like specific, we could sit here and talk about skills and abilities that a person might want or need in a leader, but really if you're somebody who's wanting to step up into a leadership role, it really starts with knowing yourself well and figuring out some of these aspects that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's about being authentic, right? It's super draining to try and lead different than who you are, right?
Hmm.
To sort of put on a facade. So a part of it is like, yeah, I feel this inkling or this yearning to lead, but but how am I going to do that? How do I approach that? And what feels natural with the gifts and abilities that I bring to the table?
Okay. So because healthcare does kind of tend to be such a hierarchical kind of system, what is it like to try to step up as in the leadership role, even in such a strictly hierarchied system such as healthcare?
Yeah, and it can be challenging in many respects, but it's also what I'm finding more and more is healthcare is shifting to be more of a team sport. And sure, the perhaps traditional approach is a physician-led team, but I find in many instances, potentially the person who knows the most might be the social worker or the healthcare navigator, whoever that happens to be, the nurse manager. And so, from a patient care perspective, often the people who are sort of quarterbacking the team are often other staff members. I think the other thing about healthcare is there's no shortage of places to improve it and to make it better. And so that provides a ton of opportunities for someone to step up and lead a group. Maybe it's a process that needs to get better. Maybe we need to start a new clinic service or something that our patients need. Tons of opportunity, whether you have sort of that formal position or you're quote higher in the hierarchy. I think there are tons of opportunities, which is why we all need these skills.
Yeah. That's good. I appreciate you bringing that out. That is actually that's something that I've been able to notice working with our scholars is even within the small group discussions that we have. We have medical students, we have nursing students, we have pharmacy students, we have even chemical dependency study students, and they're starting to kind of realize even in this small context about like, yes, I'm training to become a physician, and they're really starting to realize no, everybody has an important part that they can share, and related to our discussion today, how they can step up and take a lead in these roles.
Yeah, absolutely. You might even think of it as, what does the patient most need? Maybe that's the person who should lead the
Mm.
team at that particular
That's a good
moment,
way to frame it. Yeah.
right? And let the patient be the one that dictates to the team what they need and who needs to lead out.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Maybe sometimes we also historically think about management when we're thinking about leadership. Could you talk about the difference between leadership and management?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have an anecdote I picked up from a book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by
Yeah.
Stephen Covey.
Yep.
So he talks about this group of people, he calls them producers, and they're making their way through the jungle and they're chopping through the foliage and the trees. And what he says is the managers are the ones, making sure the machetes are sharp and, people are using the best technique and we've got the right people, working together. So that's management, logistics. He says the leader is the person who climbs up the tallest tree, surveys the scene, and says, wrong jungle. So what I like about that is, management is operations, it's schedules, it's logistics, it's budget. Leadership is, are we headed in the right direction? Are we doing the right work? Is it good enough? Do we need to improve it? So for me, management often comes with titles.
Mm,
So, uh, not all managers are leaders,
mm.
right? But, all leaders need to have some form of management, right? To be able to get people to work together. So, I think it's an important distinction. They're often used interchangeably. It's a little bit of my own pet peeve, because they're not the same and they're both important. But I think it's good to note the difference.
Yeah. I also think about one time I saw an illustration of like the difference between a leadership and a manager is you have a team of people who are like pulling a box along and there's a person sitting on top of the box kind of giving directions versus somebody who's right there alongside the rest of the team
Yeah,
pulling that box along.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well that's a good to know. So what would you say maybe somebody thinks to themselves, well, I'm just not a leader. I'm not that kind of personality. I don't like to manage people. I don't like to step up and make decisions. Is it still important that people like who feel that way about themselves learn these leadership qualities and abilities, or is it really something that anybody could just be like, I have no desire at all to participate in leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of domains that are really important. We still should understand ourselves, right? That's like we've talked about, that's important regardless. But all of us work on teams, right? We're interdependent with other people. So will we be the one at the forefront leading the way or pushing the vision or what we need to do? Maybe not. But in this idea of leadership is this idea of functioning on a team. So how do I show up in a group situation? What are my strengths? What are my areas of weakness? How do I see the other people around me? How do I, you know, blend my skills with somebody else. Nobody teaches us how to do that, right? That's an important thing. If I'm good at this and they're good at this, like how do we synergize and work together? Or what happens when we don't get along? So in my mind, when we're in this big umbrella of leadership, these are domains that are all important for everybody, right? And because the nature of our work is in teams, we've got to be able to have the core skills of teaming, of operating with other people.
Yeah, would it be fair to say that even effective leaders don't always necessarily not even like come to the forefront? Like you might not even recognize that somebody is stepping up to take on the lead.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. You don't have to be an extrovert, right? A lot of very successful introverted leaders. Sometimes people just need a push in a certain direction, and somebody can lead out on that. I mean, there's a lot of contributions from a leadership standpoint that everybody can make.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I really appreciate getting this kind of overview of the topic. But then we can also kind of start to narrow down in and apply this to our AHEC scholars. Because one of the things that we do with AHEC scholars is we encourage them to, we're giving them this additional training and the certification really to step up and take on leadership roles when they do eventually get into their practice. So what would you say if you were to give advice to somebody who's kind of just starting their healthcare journey and is thinking about eventually stepping up to take on leadership roles? What would be a good place for them to start?
I mean, I think anytime you come together in a group to work on something, use it as a learning lab, right? Use it as an opportunity to say, where can I be helpful? Where maybe am I stumbling and tripping up, and how do I work with another group, right? So that could be in school on a project. It could be, you know, in this program, right? Working together and learning together. All of these are opportunities for us to hone our skills. So just being intentional about it, like it's easy to show up, let something happen, and be done. It's a whole other thing to say, I'm going to use this as a chance to learn and to try out some of these people or relationship oriented skills.
Okay, I appreciate you lampshading that because we will actually, moving forward with AHEC Scholars as we kind of shift towards this more collaborative format, that we will be asking some of the scholars to step up and take the lead in leading group discussions. There's usually going to be some kind of breakout work that they'll be doing, and so we might ask the students to step up. So that'll be a good opportunity for them to practice. Um, what are some of the different domains to think about, some of the different skills that might be involved? Somebody who wants to practice at being a leader, what are some things that they can work on?
Yeah, I think one of the aspects of working on a team that I think is vital is this idea of creating a safe space. And so
Mm,
we sort of throw that term out, but what we're talking about is, psychological safety.
mm.
It's a space where people feel safe to take risks and there's not going to be any retribution, right? Any fallout or negative outcome associated with that. And I think, you know, every opportunity where we get together as a group is a chance to build that. So, do I come into a group setting? Do I take over? Do I give marching orders? Do people say very little and then we leave? Right? That's not a super safe space. But if I'm being intentional, I'm thinking, how do I create a space where everyone can contribute, where everyone feels comfortable weighing in, where we can get ideas from each person? So that might be saying, I really want to jump into this conversation, but I'm actually going to be quiet for a second and I'm going to let somebody else jump into this space. Or it might be where you realize, like, I actually don't really know what I'm doing here or what the answer might be, but hey, I think that dental student might know, or I think our medical student or our nursing student might know, and inviting them in. One thing that I have learned over the years that I take into consideration a lot is, people pay attention to the signals we send to each other, right? If we're open and inviting and collaborative, people will respond to that. If we sort of are argumentative or defensive or shut things down, people will respond to that too, and they'll shut down. So, our ability to signal out that a space is open and safe for people, I think is key. And especially in a healthcare context where we're talking about the health and well-being of people, we need to have spaces where we can disagree with each other, where we can get better ideas out onto the table, because ultimately it's going to affect people's lives.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it sounds like team dynamics are really important to consider when you're talking about taking on leadership roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So could you speak a little bit more to that about the how my team dynamics come into play? How can you leverage different components of the team or um, because we're working with that definition that like being a leadership is enabling others to do their best work. And then we also talked about psychological safety, so creating that in those teams. Um, so how do we do that? How do we see the potential for ourselves and in others to help them contribute in the most meaningful way?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, couple ground rules, right? Names become super important.
Mm,
Do I know the people's names? Do I use their names? Do I address them sort of on that people level? People
mm,
really like that. Um, I mentioned how important it is for us to know ourselves. Well, the other aspect of that is true, which is we have to know other people, right? So, where are you in your training program? What do you think you bring to the table? What are skills and abilities, right? Like we need to know what people around us can do, what they're going to be really good at, before we can start to put that into play. So taking that initial time to have those discussions. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us what you're learning. Where might you contribute? What do you really love to do from a collaboration and work standpoint? All of that starts to build that cohesion and those team dynamics so that when it gets a little tough or we're not sure what to do, we have a really good sense of who to lean on uh, in that team to help things go better.
okay. Maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into psychological safety then to really how do we build that in the team so that everybody feels comfortable to show up in their most authentic selves and participate.
Yeah, you bet. So, one of the people that I really appreciate in this space is Timothy Clark. He wrote a book on psych safety, and he gave 4 stages to it. And so each one sort of has its own set of things we can do to help it. So, inclusion safety is the first one, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. So I covered a little bit on inclusion safety, right? Which is welcoming someone into the space or asking people's names. I was once on a collaborative work group where I joined after everybody else, so I was new. I showed up, it was a virtual meeting. Uh, Nobody even addressed the fact that I was there. Nobody asked me to introduce myself, and nobody introduced themselves to me. Well, I stopped going
Mm.
because I didn't feel that sense of being included, of being a part of that team. And so it was really easy for me to walk away. So the first thing is bring people to the table, get to know them, create that space for everyone to feel part of whatever work it is that you're doing. Then in learning safety, I think the big key is to understand that like there's a ton of stuff we don't know. Even as the pharmacist, I'll get a drug question from time to time, and I'll be like, you know what? I'm not sure. Let me look it up. And knowing that it's okay to sort of ask questions, to learn new things, that's a big deal because somebody might have a question but not feel comfortable voicing that because they don't want to look like they don't know what they're talking about. So all of us should be like, oh yeah, great question. Let's figure it out. Or maybe you do know the answer and you could say, yeah, I appreciate you answering that or asking that. Then there's contributor safety. So that gets more to how do we invite ideas into a space? So maybe we have a question and we make sure everyone gets a chance to weigh in. Or maybe we figure out like we put up a board or a space where it's the idea board and it is encouraging people to jump in. The last one that's the hardest is challenger safety. How do we create a space where people feel comfortable disagreeing? So, like socially, that's really counterintuitive to us, right? You want things to go well, you want to get along, but we do our best work when we can challenge each other, when we can say that we disagree and find a better solution. So, one thing I think a lot about is how do I respond when someone disagrees with me? Do I talk over them? Do I shut them down? Do I get defensive and argue my point? Or do I say something like, you know what, tell me more about that. What are you thinking? What's leading to that? What are we missing here as a group? It just invites that challenge into the space and helps us figure out. And the coolest relationships and opportunities that I've ever had have come when we can disagree and argue with each other because we end up at a better spot. That could be for our team. More importantly, it could be for a patient. And there might be a time where something's about to happen with a patient that might actually harm them. And we need to have that ability to disagree. So, in many ways, in all these topics, what I love about being in a training space, a learning space, is it's like a little bit of playing in the leadership sandbox, right? We can try this on, make mistakes, totally mess it up, but the stakes are low. Over time, when we're playing in the sandbox, we're going to get better and better at this so that when we get out in practice and we're in surgery or we're in clinic or and the stakes are high,
Mhm.
we have the skills to be able to do this.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing out that last point because it's kind of what I was thinking in my mind is maybe in other contexts and other settings, if a team is not working well, like you were mentioning your example, you just kind of walked away from it when you were not being addressed, you weren't being talked to. Um, in almost any other context outside of healthcare, it's like worst case scenario, the world doesn't end, right? But in a healthcare context, you have to show up there because people's lives are at stake. So you're always constantly forced to be working in these team dynamics and working together to achieve a goal. And the goal being that we're taking care of people who need your help. And so this is one of the contexts that's most important that we continue to uh, kind of challenge that hierarchical structure to be much more team focused. And so these are places like we're mentioning, maybe you don't feel like you want to step up to be a leader. No matter what you can do is to make sure that the working space, the team that you're working on is a psychologically safe space to work and that everybody feels like they're valuable contributions to that team.
Yeah, 100%. And you may not believe it, right? But there are instances where errors happen. So, for example, like you're going in for knee surgery and it's your right leg that has a torn ligament, and the team is literally about to operate on the left leg. And you
Mhm.
wouldn't ever believe that this could happen, right? But it does.
Mhm.
And you need to be able to say, like, hey, like, can we just pause for a second? Can we time out and just double check ourselves? Like, is it the right leg or is it the left?
I think sometimes we kind of default to thinking when leadership or management gets involved, something must be going wrong. Like they're here to micromanage us to fix things and get us back on track. That's not always the case, though. Maybe strong leadership should come from a more of a strengths-based approach. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a tendency to think about what happens when things go wrong, but what do I do to help things go right? Right? So how do I create, I don't know, a workflow where everybody gets to contribute at the top of their training? I think that's a really big thing. We all go to school for a long time, right? We spend a lot of time in these training programs, and we want to contribute in a meaningful way. So thinking about as a leader, like I know the training and expertise of the people around me. How do I put them in positions to shine? How do I help things go right? Am I regularly checking in with people? Am I getting a sense of, how are you doing and what's bugging you and what can we do to fix that so that it doesn't become really a big issue? So there's that proactive part of really helping things go right. And I think it's largely a focus on people, right? Am I keeping track of my people and how they're doing and helping them be as successful as possible?
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a really good framework to get us really have our scholars start to think about how they can step up in any way possible and start taking on those leadership roles. Where do team discussions sometimes get in trouble? Or what are like that concept of like the five dysfunctions of a team? What are some of the different ways in which team dynamics can go wrong? And then maybe that's where a leader could step in and help set things back on course.
Yeah, the first thing that always comes to mind for me is, do we know how to handle conflict? Do we know when we disagree with someone, when we're having an issue with somebody, do we know what to do? I would say the vast majority of people like to ignore conflict, right? It's conflict is a little bit uncomfortable. So we say, I'm just not going to really worry about it. I'm going to try not to address it. Maybe it will get better. But I think more often than not, it doesn't get better and things start to fester or people feel upset or frustrated. So when you think about a skill associated with this, the number one thing I think about is, how do you surface a conflict? And sometimes there's ways to do this that are less threatening. I knew a team once that if somebody was having an issue, they actually had like a physical red button that somebody could hit that just signaled to the team, like, hey, we need to pause and we need to talk about it. Now, in my role, especially early on, right, I would often disagree with the treatment options with my physician colleagues. And I had to figure out, like, well, how do I bring that up? Because I'm not here to just tell them that they're wrong, because they're usually not wrong, but there might be a better option. And so I would figure out, just how do I plant it? I'd be like, hey, I notice we're doing this. Just had a thought that potentially XYZ could help our patient. What do you think about that? And it would at least bring it up and engage in a conversation. Or maybe, how do we refocus a group, right? Maybe we have a buzzword when we think maybe we're getting off topic. Maybe we can call a timeout, or maybe we could zoom out for a second and just check in and see how we're doing. So All of these are a little bit less directly confrontational with someone, but it helps us raise the issue up so that we can address it. Conflicts can never be resolved unless they're first raised.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what weird thing about our psychology is that we are so conflict averse at times, but really, if it's handled in a good way, in a positive way, it actually is positive, a net positive for the team.
Yeah, and conflict is different than contempt,
Hmm.
right? Conflict is just a disagreement. It's a misalignment between two people. That contempt piece comes in when we start to, I don't know, make up stories about what's going on, right?
Hmm.
Maybe I have a disagreement with someone. If I go down that route of sort of vilifying them or blaming them or, just starting to draw battle lines, that's getting into that contempt piece. We don't have to go there. We can say, you know what? Something's off. I'm not sure what it is. And actually, the key is to get curious about it, right? Say somebody shows up, they're normally warm and bubbly on the team dynamic or maybe in a group we're working with, and all of a sudden they're cold and short and upset. We might have the temptation to be like, "Oh, what did I do? Like, why did I make him mad?" That's a conflict, right? We're now feeling that tension, that misalignment. It might be better rather than sort of fill in the blank on what's going on. Why don't I get curious and start asking questions? Hey, it seems like you're kind of quiet today, or it seems like something might be off. What's up? What's going on? How can I help? And just invite them to step into that space and figure out what's going on. And then you can do something about it. Like, oh, hey, I just sort of had a blow up at home and I'm just coming in a bad day. Or hey, like I just like fender bendered somebody on the way over and I'm just still kind of reeling from that. That kind of stuff we can deal with, right? We have more empathy, we have more understanding of what's going on, and we don't end up down a bad sort of contempt pathway.
Okay, yeah. I try to like avoid specific examples when we talk about this, but I do appreciate that you're kind of constantly littering them in there. Like this is the bigger topic, the bigger picture subject that might be coming up, and then here's how you could approach it in certain different contexts. So I appreciate bringing that out as well. Um, so, because a big component of being a leader is being able to provide that feedback, right? It is being able to step up and say, "Hey, I noticed this," or even eliciting feedback from your teammates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, have I created a safe enough space for that?
Hmm.
So that's step number one. Two, I think we often need to do like the feedback sandwich, but it's pretty much been debunked that we need to do like
Yeah.
a positive, a negative, and a positive to make that feedback sandwich. I always think that we should be giving feedback on a regular basis, and especially positive feedback.
Hmm.
Right? And maybe we have to create the space to do that. Right?
Hmm.
Maybe at the end of a meeting, the end of a day, we have to create a space that we say, yeah, it's our feedback time. What kind of feedback? And people love to hear the things they're doing well.
Yeah.
Right? In that moment, when you said this, when you did that, that was really awesome. Right?
Right.
That strengthens us. That gets people like all the happy chemicals in our brain go off. And we don't, it's not to butter people up, but then when there's an opportunity to say, hey, that didn't work so well, we've created that sort of habit of giving
Hmm.
feedback, especially if that feedback is more oriented to the team or to the patient, right? And helping things go better. So that is another critical skill. And it's a little bit in that conflict domain, but just that ability to talk through how things have gone, either positive or negative, super important.
Yeah. Rather than a feedback sandwich, it's more like a feedback lasagna where there's just constant layers of like feedback, positive and constructive
Yep.
all in
Sort
there.
of the all you can eat buffet, right? We're
Yeah.
doing it so often that like it just becomes, if it just becomes a normal part of the team,
Yeah.
it's not awkward, right?
Right.
Because a team that's safe and wants to learn and improve welcomes feedback. And so part of it is just trying little by little to create a culture where that's an acceptable and even an encouraged thing.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say like the ideal would even get to a point where whenever constructive feedback is given or received, like you kind of almost don't even notice it because you're just like, oh yeah, thanks for that little tip. Of course I'm going to try and implement that and improve.
Yeah, then it would feel natural and normal. You know what I mean? And it's not really a big deal anymore because we're sort of always doing it.
Yeah. Like I remember the first time I had a manager who I was out on call one day and he calls me up and I'm like, oh crap, my manager's calling me. What's wrong? And then he's just like, I just want to let you know you're doing a fantastic job. You're one of the best techs we've had in a while. And I'm like, oh wow. And how completely different that had been from the previous jobs that I'd had, where the only time I ever heard from a manager was when they were coming to talk to me about something I'd done wrong.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it gets back to that signaling piece, right? The signals had always been phone call from manager, you're
mhm.
in trouble.
Yeah.
New signals, phone call from manager, oh, they're just checking in. They're just telling me
Mhm.
something that's going well. And that makes you want to continue to do that thing. That's the cool part of that psychology is when somebody gives you that sort of authentic positive feedback, you're like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm gonna keep helping our team.
Awesome. Fantastic. So something you mentioned before is that leadership at its core is about change. Is that something you could kind of maybe to wrap up our discussion today? What do you mean by leadership is about change and maybe even becoming comfortable with that change?
Yeah, you bet. So some of these domains have built, right? We start with ourself, who we are, what we bring to the table. We think about the way we interact with other people. And then the last thing, you know, people that leading in the face of uncertainty usually means something needs to change. We're not sure the path we should take, or, there's a new factor influencing us and we have to respond to it. That's when leadership is needed, and it involves getting a group of people to change or to improve or to advance something. So when I think about these domains, the first two, self and team, those are core. But if we're being called to lead, if we're feeling that desire to lead, it's usually in the service of something better, right? It's making our process better, our clinic better, our hospital better, whatever it happens to be. We want to see things grow and advance. And so, there's a lot of theories, and maybe this is a discussion for another day about how you go about making change. But it gets back to your earlier point. If I don't feel like a leader, or if I don't feel like I want to stand out, everything can always get better. We can always advance what we're doing, and anybody at any part of the organization or the team can help make that happen. Uh, I'd say point out where issues are and come ready with a solution. It will be transformational for everyone's career. It's easy to point out flaws. That one's Everybody can do that.
Yeah.
What not everybody can do is see the flaws and think about solutions and then bring those solutions either to the team or a manager or somebody, right? That's a leadership step, right? And often they'll start to pick your brain even more like, oh, what would you do? Or, oh, that's a good idea. Like, do you want to try that? Would you be willing to help us do that? And then all of a sudden we're in that change maker domain. So it can be little sea change, right? Little tweaks, little improvements, little ways to get involved. Or it could be big sea change, right? Like we want to see our community, our state, our country, whatever. But I'd encourage most people just think about the little sea changes. Notice them around you and be the type of person that brings solutions to the table.
Awesome. Well, is there any like thoughts you had, you last minute wrap up? We're kind of coming up on the end of our time, but just any last comments that you might have about the importance of leadership, or even pointed specifically for AHEC scholars as they're growing into healthcare roles and stepping up to take on leadership roles.
Yeah. I think the one thing I'd just leave with is this is a journey, right? The journey to being a leader, to becoming a more effective leader, it's a journey that takes a long time. Uh, but if we're willing to jump in and try it, uh, especially early on in training stages, and it's going to be well worth it. And despite all the technology we're going to have and the tools and AI and all these transformative things, these are the skills that are going to ultimately make a difference.
Yeah.
So the sooner we become aware of them and start to work on them, these are going to be the things that are going to make and break our careers, are going to stand out to employers. And I mean, they really become tangible things that are going to make the difference in how happy and successful we are in our careers. So my invitation is to start the journey, right? Just try things out, build some skills, play in the sandbox, mess up, make mistakes, and ultimately we'll find more joy and satisfaction, and everyone around us will be better served for it.